All right, it's time to open the C-suite. I'm Corey,
Mike.
and today's topic is Board of Directors Management. It's one of those activities that every CEO has that nobody in the company understands except maybe the CFO, and nobody realizes just how much time it takes. So, Mike, if I say, how do you manage your board? What's the first thing to come to mind?
Well, you're right. Nobody knows this is a whole job category.
Right.
So for me, I'm looking at about a decade or so startup period. So there's different stages of that.
Sure.
I think the first board meeting I ever had was like 50 minutes
Right.
with, our first two board members. We were the last
I thought
thing.
audit committee meetings longer than that, but anyway, yeah.
Clearly the last thing on the priority list as we should have been. And then, we were typically doing hour to 90-minute meetings in those early days. By the end of being, say, like, I don't know, somewhere north of a few million in revenue,
Right.
You were on this board. We were
Yep.
doing, 4 or so hour meetings. So just to clarify the different stages from like early kind of seed, pre-seed, to post Series A and starting to scale, it definitely evolved.
Sure.
Just to clarify the stages that you were managing boards.
I mean, I've managed directly boards in hundreds of millions of revenue, been on public boards, also been an employee managing public board at the, multi-billion dollar market cap level.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Okay.
So very different spots than you.
Yeah. So answering the question, when somebody asks what does it mean to manage the board? I mean, the meeting is like the nucleus of it, but around that is, the whole cycle of communications
Yep.
that lay the stage for having an effective
Yep.
board meeting. What I had to go through, definitely a learning curve on, was realizing that no matter how like impactful, high profile the individual, whether it's board member or like a super angel type, we had Mark Cuban on our
Yep.
cap table. He joined a few meetings. The onus was on me as founder or CEO to facilitate the environment by which we were able to extract the insights
Yep.
or network or whatever value from the board. And so, just kind of like lay the stage that way. Beyond compliance, it was, how do I facilitate an environment that you, as a CEO of your own right, who's coming in to my arena for a short period of time, even if it's 4 hours, how do I lay it up that you can be impactful in that setting? So
You have a really important point in there. You're a facilitator at the meeting, because I find a lot of CEOs think they're the main presenter.
Yeah.
Not really. They don't have to be.
Yeah.
Facilitator, absolutely.
Yeah. That was when we were post Series A. You were on this board. I remember having a few of those first meetings. They were higher pressure than we had before. This was a 4.5 hour meeting.
Yeah.
We had been doing hour to 90-minute long meetings
And it
before.
was 120 page deck.
Yeah, right. The long deck. I remember Troy on our board, lead investor, giving me feedback after saying, you're doing too much.
Right.
Open up the meeting, give the state of packback, as we called it at the time, high level CEO color, but then get out of the way and let the individual functional owners also have the stage, be able to share, their perspective as being closer to it, and then let the board opine in. I was like steamrolling through the whole thing as, the big presenter, and it wasn't as productive.
Yeah, the board meeting is not a stage for the CEO. I think is a really important thing. And in my mind, the board meeting is a part of board management, but it is maybe 30 or 40% of board management. There's 60 to 70% of the job that is outside of that board meeting.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and on the point of, it's not the CEO's stage. At the earliest days of a startup, I felt like it was the CEO's interview. So I'm feeling like and it's all self-inflicted, but it's like, okay, I don't know if anybody thinks I know what I'm doing or we know what I'm doing. So I better come in and present really well. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's like the biggest thing. Do you have enough confidence actually to step back and facilitate versus
and that is
drive?
the enormous point, right? You demonstrate to your board that you're really there to prove that your management team's got this under control.
Yeah.
That your management team are people the board can trust, because they're going to have talked to you a whole lot more. They're going to know a lot more about you. You want them to have comfort and confidence in the company.
Yeah.
And the company has to be more than you.
Yes.
And really, a good board meeting is a time for your people to shine. Now, there's an aspect, and we're not going to go too deep into board meeting management, but there's an aspect at times. I've let too many executives present at a meeting, and the board gets a little annoyed. Yeah. And so this went too long, but I also had reason to do it. Like, well, this person wasn't in front of the board, didn't feel good. And, and sometimes you're not, the board's like, what are you trying to accomplish here? And it's like, it's actually not for you this time, it's someone else. But
yeah, interesting.
We can get more in depth on the board meeting itself another time. But outside of a board meeting, what else is involved in managing and for you with the board?
Yeah. The worst thing, and everybody says it's not new insight. The worst thing that can happen is a surprise comes up in the board meeting, right? So there's individual stakeholder management of the players that are going to be around the table. So, we've talked about bad news traveling fast,
Yes.
right? I historically would, show up to the meeting and all the information comes out, right? You probably got an email at midnight the night before with our long deck, right?
Right.
You learn to grow past that
Yeah.
and make sure that if there is something substantial that's going to be discussed, you started to get a one-on-one call from me, right?
Yep.
I would call others on the board and no surprise is occurring, especially if it's bad news. But even if it's like, strategic kind of like new insider direction, let's
look. I do enjoy dropping a little bit of a, hey, we just closed that deal in the middle of the board meeting.
That's fun, but sure.
But it doesn't change the
good.
trajectory of the meeting, doesn't change anything, right?
Yeah.
But in a really important aspect to that, if you're going to set the stage in advance, it means you got to do the work earlier than the day before you're sending the deck, right? So, and more times than not, bad news comes out of a financial model. It comes out of something's wrong with the numbers. We're ahead on expenses. We're behind on revenue. Those are the two most typical bad news areas. It could be something like a lawsuit or something. And rarely are the things that you can plan typically come out of a financial model. The things you can't plan timing wise, they show up when they show up. But that means you've got to be, I would always set a schedule on the board meeting. So I always gave myself time to communicate in advance, right? So how do I go and tell the board what I'm seeing, and then we have time to think remedies. We have time to think about how to deal with it before the meeting as well. And so we go into the meeting more prepared. Another big aspect to outside the boardroom is figuring out what you're getting from each board member. Board members bring different skills, right? The boards I sit on today, I typically am the independent director, which means I'm kind of a confidant for the CEO. I'm not representing an investor class. And so I'm the person they go to. And so I'm not ready to tell the whole board this yet, but here's what I got to deal with. And you're there to brainstorm with them. But now it's a little bit of cone of silence between you, the independent director, and the board member and the CEO. And you're like, all right, how do I help this person work through it so they can build up to communicating and working with the others, right? That's one role. There's another role, someone be a subject matter expert in your area. There's another role, someone may be really good at finance, really good at numbers. You mentioned Troy on your board. He was just snap with the numbers and understood the mechanics really quickly. Like you knew you could go to him for that. So I always found, and I've made this mistake before, actually on my last board, I had a gentleman who understood our industry a lot better than I used him for. I probably should have used him more, right?
Same.
So breaking down the skill sets that the board members, that will dictate how you go to them beyond just, here's a board meeting, here's a cadence.
And it's easy to get caught in this mentality, I think, as a CEO, at least, for me, like when we started off young, first time founders, all this, that these are the bosses. These are the bosses in the big room, and we're reporting in, and like, hopefully we get an okay report card. Like, that's not what this is about. To your point, there's a role for each member of the board. Like, they're there for a reason. There's some kind of expertise, talent, comfort they bring, whatever. And so, that took me a while to understand, like, okay, it's not even just like one board. It's understanding each individual. And again, how do you facilitate an environment where Corey can be as impactful to us with the sliver of time across the rest of your year that you have on our company?
And that's the impact even outside the board meeting, right? It's, hey, we're going to have to work through this. So, for me, effective board management, and I had a great mentor when I was at a company that became known as Rovi, name change and such. He was terrific about knowing, I need this person on the board. I need to talk to them at least twice in a quarter because, they're going to just feel unsettled if I don't. And he's going to help me manage these other people on the board. This woman on our board, she's going to be happy to come to the board meeting as long as I send her a note in advance and let her know this. And it was understanding how they want to be communicated with. And then when he should reach out to one of them. We had a situation where we were going through big strategy change. And he was like, all right, this is the person you're going to work with. And you're going to keep him and the board up to speed. And he had outsourced that. He was the CEO and he had outsourced it to meet a couple other executives because he knew that would help.
So you're rolling your sleeves up as a board member.
And so
let me ask you this question, because we're coming at it from, early startup stage and, later stage, at least as a CEO, but you've been on both boards, later stage as a CEO, board member as the earlier stage. What are some of the key fundamental differences of what changes as you go up the stages?
Fiscal responsibility. I mean, if you're a public company,
Yeah.
you are people are signing, forms that say I go to jail if this is wrong,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
there's just a different level of scrutiny. Audit committee meetings go longer, comp committee meetings
okay.
go longer. HR is way more involved in board meetings at a public company
Okay.
than at a private company. At least they should be. I will say it doesn't happen all the time, right? So that's just the rigor of all of the mechanical stuff. There's more lawyers involved documenting
And does
everything.
this
and so
whole
on.
compliance category become the kind of lion's share of the board purpose at that point, or is it still what I'm talking about of my extended team?
It depends on the company.
Okay.
I would suggest the bigger the company, the more it becomes a lion's share of the board responsibility and board check-ins, and then board approval over major strategic decisions.
Yeah.
Acquisitions, strategy changes, opening up a new line of business, things like that. Kind of as you move down, the board is going to have a little more engagement. I'll go back to my days at Rovi. We made a massive acquisition. We had 4 or 5 special board meetings to bring the board along as we were talking about it and thinking about it.
Okay, out of normal cadence.
Totally out of normal
Another
cadence.
meeting,
hey,
yeah.
it was a bet the company move, buying a company bigger than us, and then we were going to divest half of the company we bought.
Sure.
So that was the real trick about a board. How do you bring them along?
Yeah.
How do you? And it's not just the bad news. It's not just no surprises. How do you bring them along? How do you hear them?
Yep.
So you're not just trying to get them to nod. If they're on your board, they should have some expertise to offer you in the company.
Yeah.
And without that expertise, you got to think about why they're on your board. And if they have the expertise, use it.
Yeah, right.
And that's the key as a CEO is how can I use the expertise? Who do I tap into?
All right. So let me ask you this then, as a board member. An example or scenario you can share where you felt well used as a board member, and another where maybe you felt like I could be doing more, but the facility of it is just not meshing.
Yeah, I mean, on a board now, that the CEO I think does a terrific job of using his board.
Okay.
He understands that he's got one person on his board who's got more of a legal HR background, and he uses that person, in those areas. He brings them in. They meet with people. They help. He calls me because he needs help as he's thinking through strategy before he works with the broader board. He's thinking through financial issues. He's got a lead investor who is really good at figuring out what the multiple, what's going to mean on that if you do this and if we, put this money here and so on. And it's funny is if you ask him, he won't tell you he does a good job at this.
Sure.
Right. But as the outside looking in, I'm like, you're doing a good job of this. And I find that he has figured out whose matters. He's figured out why he's got to talk to each one of them. And there's never a surprise at the board meeting. And he uses board meetings, sometimes takes the board through exercises that he took the company through.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
To get us to engage in the strategic conversation. Get up, here's, everybody write, you got 3 Post-it notes. Which investments would you make?
Interesting.
I was like,
okay.
That's a good use.
Yeah, get actually hands-on. It's not just information delivery and feedback.
Gets in. We did this with the team. What do you think? And then tells us how we compare to the team.
Yeah.
Right. And that also helps anchor the board on how are you thinking compared to people inside.
Yeah.
Where they have more info than you. Which most boards don't always agree with, right?
It reminds me of I started doing something where we had a few meetings, when you were on my board that got hands-on enough that I felt like, all right, I've got to call an immediate management meeting afterwards because we need to continue this. And I started just pre-scheduling it with sort of the expectation that, hey, this may get canceled, but it was like the board meeting was on Wednesday. I already had
Thursday
senior
morning
leadership, Thursday meeting. Hey, something's going to be talked about in the board meeting. We're going to roll up our sleeves on something. Let's be ready to spend a few hours the next day, and then take that to all company or all management. And look, sometimes we cancel.
If we think about board meetings, think about what might be effective. Getting feedback that's going to be useful to the company means it was an effective board meeting, right? And I think about those situations. We were talking about what strategy shifts you're making, what investments, or you were good about coming in and saying, these are our areas, here's kind of what we're working through, and we'd discuss it.
Yeah.
And then hopefully we'd come up with a few other ideas that you and the management team would go beat around, right? So that was a really good precursor from you to the management team, like, be ready.
Yeah, right.
But it also meant you were open in the board meeting to hearing input and learning from the team.
Yeah.
Right.
We got to be just hungry for it because it was effective.
But let me say that the board isn't the enemy. And this is what I say. And when you say I'm going to, what about my bad board examples? I've seen it where the CEO treats the board as basically an enemy, somebody they don't want to engage. Yeah. And they're like, okay, we're going to go through this meeting. Hurry, get it over with, And when that's the case,
what a waste.
It's a waste. it's going to be there.
Yeah,
they're not
right,
going
right.
away.
Yeah.
They'll
Yeah.
be here after you.
Right, right.
So,
Yeah.
so that's the, if you walk into it and realize they're not going anywhere,
Yeah.
they are actually here to help you. They are not the enemy.
Right.
They all have some kind of skill they can offer you, even if it's not the one you needed today. They're here.
Yeah,
Take advantage of the skills they have. And if you only plan to spend time with them in the board meeting, you're not going to succeed.
Yeah.
You have to invest time in them outside. One other point, you made the comment, bad news travels fast, right? Private equity firm said that to me 20 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
Every other private equity firm I mentioned to goes, oh, that's exactly right. Bad news. They all say it, right? I've never heard a board member that think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
So that's like one of those, like, etch that in your mind,
Yeah.
right? The board's not going anywhere. Etch that in your mind. The board's not an enemy. Etch that in your mind,
Yeah.
right?
So I'm hearing board is not an enemy. Treat it as an extended team that can be valuable only if you know who each player is and how to extract that best value, put them in position.
Yep.
And then the communication around the board meeting sounds like you said 70% of it.
Yeah.
The meeting itself happens, but it's everything around it.
And around it is bringing the board along, bringing them along your thinking, bringing them along your strategy. You used to do memos that would bring people along. If you're doing M&A, you better not walk into a room and they go, why the bleep are we doing that? I don't understand. They would, oh yeah, we've talked about going into this kind of world.
Yeah.
The board being informed, being brought along is going to be the best way to manage them and get them to work with you as opposed to have a combative situation.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think there'll be more board meeting talk and opening the C-suite, but I think that does it for today. Managing the board.
Thanks.